was asking me like how in terms of like how to create a K when we don't really have resources. He was thinking about running a like a spreading K. I know that these are arguments that we're kind of familiar with, right? But can we give maybe a little bit more advice for students that want to create their own KF or to create their own K, but they don't really know what resources to go look for? Because I also know, like, the first time I started cutting up my own cards, I was completely lost because I would just Google things. So, like, what are some steps that we can kind of, and some advice that we could give students to find authors and resources that they can use for themselves and kind of read up on before they start cutting cards? Because, like, I know for me, coming from Lambda, when I first graduated, I just thought, like, everything was handed to me because that's what I was used to, like cards that were already cut by other people. But like, what are some suggestions that y'all would have? Because this is specific to a spreading K, and just to give a little bit more context, the spread, like at least via the school, spreading by debaters are kind of intimidating to like novice and JV folks. And you know, the argument is kind of like it's kind of inaccessible when you intimidate other folks just by the sheer amount of like the words that you say. Yeah, so do y'all want to kind of talk about that a little bit? I also just want to kind of start off with spreading is spread reading, if y'all are unfamiliar with that, like JV folks. And that term came to be because, like, if you watch this movie, it's called Resolved. It came out in 2007. I could also link y'all to the movie if you want. So your labs can go watch it on their own. But basically, people started fitting more arguments into policy debates because they could win and like they would just have more arguments. So that became the norm in, I think, maybe the 90s or 80s, I believe. So it just became the norm in policy debate, and more people started leaving policy debate to do other forms of debate because it became more of like an argumentation expert type of activity, right? Because only people who had trained ears could listen to the policy rounds. So just to give context, that's where spreading came from, that's where speed reading comes from, and that's why policy debate is the way that it is right now. But we also understand that, like, if it's your first time, or I'm sure when it was your first time joining debate, like people spreading really, really fast was just like not what we were used to. So what do y'all think? Like, at least the other varsity lab leaders, do y'all have any perspective on that?
Okay, just not real quick. This is another argument that I really like, because my partner and I, from January of our senior year, didn't spread in debates. We went to the TOC and didn't spread in debate rounds, which was a pretty great experience, actually. So yeah, spreading is bad, in my opinion, just like because it makes debate more inaccessible, both for people who are from programs where like maybe like you spent a long time in JV and novice, maybe you don't have coaches, maybe you just don't have time to practice speed reading for like an hour every night like you have to get really, really fast. And so that makes it really inaccessible, especially for people who like English isn't their first language, which was my partner's situation, people who have disabilities. Like spreading can be really inaccessible. And so you can also just have better debates when you don't spread because you're not going as fast. And you actually have a chance to like process the information and not just spit things back and forth as fast as you can. And so okay, anybody who wants me to send them spreading K blocks, you can message, like just drop your email in the Cyan Jasmine chat on Discord, and I'll email it to y'all afterwards. But yeah, so all of these arguments that you can think of that are like reasons why spreading would be inaccessible, reasons why debates can be better without spreading, all of those are reasons that you can list in a spreading K. You don't necessarily have to have like a bunch of carded arguments as to why spreading is bad. My advice for if you want people to not spread in rounds, well, there's two ways to take this. One is you can actually make a spreading K that you want to read at people as an offensive argument, as a strategy. That can be a little bit tricky because one, people can catch up to what you're doing and just go slow in rounds. And two, people can make the argument, we would have gone slow if you told us that you wanted us to. And of course you could debate that, but it puts you in a little bit of a like situation where you have less of a provable offense, I guess. And so what I would do instead is just ask people to not spread before rounds, and tell them that you want them to not spread as like an accessibility request, or however else you want to phrase it, and then have a spreading K ready for if they do spread during the round. But my partner and I told people that we weren't going to spread anymore and we wanted them to not spread during rounds, and nobody ever spread in a round against us after that. Partially because they were terrified we would have a really good spreading bad K against them, and actually that was probably mostly the reason. But just have that ready to go. But yeah, just think of reasons why it makes logical sense, especially if it's a super niche debate thing that you don't think there will be a lot of research on, because yeah, you can write your own spreading bad K. It's pretty popular.
In a
That's to
lot of these
Casey's question.
in a lot of these cases and like diss ads, whenever you hear like a K or a diss ad, sometimes the diss ad portion will just be an argument, and it's a creative way to label it. So for example, we were taught to like say the whiteness diss ad, right? It's not a whole file, but it's a unique way to like kind of label arguments, because when the judge writes that down, they're gonna label whatever your argument is, like, okay, this is the whiteness diss ad, we're gonna put this on case. It's not a whole separate thing. And the same thing or similar could be said about different Ks. Like for this example, it could be a K, a very short K, and kind of follow the structure or the outline of how a K is formatted, but it could also just be your analysis and just like the arguments that you're presenting in round, because a lot of the cross-section questions that would come out of a typical like K file with evidence would just be like, well, in these debates, there are usually forms of like ableism that is involved, just because like, you know, you should just be hearing better, or, you know, you can't hear, kind of those kind of like rhetoric and those kind of things. So just want to kind of put it out there. Your analytic, your analysis is also just warrants and impacts, right? So don't be discouraged because you can't find a specific file, you can't find a specific article that says the exact same thing or the exact argument that you're trying to present, right? A lot of your impacts and a lot of your warrants are your own examples and they're your own explanations. So don't be afraid because you can't find a specific file. A lot of this analysis and impacts are just your own.
Yeah,
I'll answer your.
just wanted to add on to something Leia said real quick, which is that, yeah, a lot of these things are really connected to like ableism critiques or critiques of like, for example, like language critiques of like using English centric like things like supporting like centering English because that's the language that people are spreading in. And so I definitely agree that you can like off of those with your own analysis, and like also include components of those as to like why it's bad to support those things. That can be really helpful as well.
Also, so this question, and maybe y'all responded to it already, so, you know, stop me if you have, about should spreading bad be read as a critique or more of a theory argument? My response to that is that it can be either or both. One is because if you're reading it as a critique, it's already kind of a theoretical argument that you are kind of framing out on the framework debate of then like what should debate look like, what does it mean, how does the affirmative then violate it. But I do think to kind of add to what Saya was just saying in terms of how it can be ran and how, you know, as personal experience of it being ran against myself, the things that I kind of thought of through it in the debate is that it also is seen as like a argument magnifier for like holistic training. And so their argument would be that you are having a conversation about like anti-Blackness, right? Or you're having a conversation about things that implicate particular communities, and that the way in which debate is set up is one that is, you know, ivory tower-esque or doesn't kind of engage with the folks that it discusses. I.e. the CJR topic might sound a lot like a whole bunch of white folks saying reform is good because Black people are dying, or reform is good because, like, you know, we should care about incarceration because that really would affect the community. But the argument to why the spreading K would be used in like a KF debate, which it could be used in a policy round two for a soft left critique is you have made these kind of arguments theoretically for why engagement or conversations for why there are barriers to engagement of certain communities. But what about how you have kind of deployed that argument speaks to that engagement? And while that definitely does have things within like ableism on some level, I don't think it's as much of that criticism as it is kind of like how holistic or how kind of on the ground organic, right, is what you are saying and who is it intended for? Like, are you just kind of saying things for book sake, or are you saying this to be helpful towards creating a criticism with the folks, not about the folks in mind that you are discussing? So that's kind of to respond to kind of, could this be a theory argument, but also adding additional reasons as to why people read the Spreading K and in what different debates this looks like.
Yeah, I also just want to add, because I've been on both sides of this kind of debate, like in college, where we were kind of asked to slow down and also ask others to slow down. On the flip side of the kind of spreading, the Spreading K or the spreading argument, it usually has to do like around like anxiety, and this is pretty much true. I also tell this to a lot of my students. When you're public speaking, when you're nervous, you tend to speak a lot faster. And as debaters, we already tend to talk really, really fast. Like every non-debate person I've talked to said like, wow, you speak really fast. And to me, that's my normal voice. So on the flip side, it's not always intentional. Usually these things can be solved like, hey, could you just slow down a little bit? Cause like, my hearing, or just like, we're new here. So usually as a courtesy that pretty much solves it, right? But sometimes with the other teams, just like, oh, this is a tactic for us to slow down. Sometimes they could be offensive and just do it anyway. So it depends really what your intention is, if you want this to be a whole K or if you just want it to be a little bit more accessible and just less intimidating for your other debaters. But also just keep that in mind. A lot of these things can kind of like be talked out during the round or before the round. But if it is like an ongoing thing, there's definitely more resources and research that y'all can do.
I love not spreading.
I have a
to
thing.
clarify. In my last 2 years of debate, me and my debate partner also chose not to. Well, I mean, I guess I chose not to spread, and it was in a similar fashion to Saya. It was just like my partner, if they didn't have access to this thing, then I wasn't going to do it. And my partner was a new debater, and it wasn't like something that we could really transition into. Like after when you're first getting into debate and you're really invested in it, you want to learn all the things that other people can do. Because we're younger, when we're in high school and middle school, we're younger. And so we're more adept towards assimilation as opposed to when we get older. Like, because we were in college debate. And so my debate partner was dang near 30. And she was married and a regular person, and so she was like, why are they talking so fast? Just like point blank period. What are we doing? Like, this is not how we were speaking at practice. What's going on here? And for a long time, we had tried to just make it work. And I would like maybe talk fast and then like she would talk slow. And then we realized that it makes sense. And so I think that when deciding between like spreading being read as a critique or a theory, you should decide like, because remember we talked about form and content critiques. So a spreading K can like those are both Ks, okay? Like either way, if it's theory or if it's about, it's a K. It's a K. So either you will be critiquing the form, i.e. the idea that they were spreading in the round, and that is bad for your ability to participate in a world where I'm telling y'all about my partner who's a person who is new to debate and just doesn't get it, just can't participate in the debate round. If you're spreading, then I might make a critique of spreading that's about the form. If I make a critique about spreading that is about maybe the content, remember the form and content division, then I might be just making it about the idea that, well, actually, I don't think that's a form. As I hear it speaking out loud, I just think it's another form. It's another form as opposed to another content critique. Just about like, maybe theoretically spreading is bad for debate. that people in debate should slow down for a ton of different reasons, but it can also just be about the particular people in that room, or it can be about the community writ large. I think that would be the major differences between the types of spreading Ks. Are you making a spreading K about this debate and other debates that you might have against us, or just this debate maybe? Or is it about your critique of spreading in debate overall?
I think another thing too is that if you genuinely don't want people to spread, you should say this before the round even starts. Because in some ways, people want to have that gotcha moment, like, oh, ha, you spread, there's a link, I'm gonna go ham on this. But it's like, if you're really like interested in it not being a thing, you would say, hey, is it possible that you're not spreading this debate? Like, I don't really like jive with that too well. Or you can give another reason, whatever. You don't even have to explain yourself, but if you have like a really serious, like, hey, can you not spread in this debate? Like, seriously? And then if they do, then I think it's like, oh, okay, now I'm going to do it because I asked you beforehand and you still did it. Now you don't care. So all good. So that's just kind of how I thought about it.
I also kind of wonder, should you approach, sorry, I probably should be saying this in the chat. So if you want me to just say this in the chat, but it's probably easier to just say it. Should you approach like critiquing spreading differently when you're at like a national circuit tournament?
Spreading very late in my debate career. And because of that, a lot of people didn't take us very seriously when we said that we were going to quit. Because like, for context, we decided that we were going to quit the night before day 2 of one of the most prestigious round robins in high school debate, because the day before, my partner had been like, look, I've put up with a lot from debate, but like when we were in that round debating against one of the top teams in the country, I literally could not understand what that kid was saying because it was just like absurd and I could not translate in my head that fast. And I was like, valid. So yeah, we didn't do that. But when we came in the next day and we were like, hey, yeah, we don't want people to spread against us. We won't spread against you either, but like, it's just an accessibility request. There was a coach who literally tried to chew us out in the hallway and was like, you're one of the fastest teams in the country. What do you mean you don't want us to spread? And we were like, dude, like, chill. It's a debate round. We're serious about this and we're like not going to spread anymore. So for those things, it's like, we found that it became not as big of a deal because we like put on our wiki that we didn't want people to spread against us. We told everybody before every round and then repeated it while the judge was in the room before every round. And then after that, we didn't have any problems with it. But you just need to make it very clear that, yeah, you are dead serious. You're not just saying this so you can trip them up with a spreading K, but yeah, you are like entirely willing to follow through with that if they're like dismiss your request, because, you know, people should be decent human beings and not mess with you. But yeah, also I do not debate in college, for whoever asked that.
And like just another thing to add, because like I wish I kind of knew this when I was debating in college because I had a difficult time. Like asking for the analysis in debate arguments. I know that different people find or may think about this differently, or they feel a type of way about sending analysis or written analysis, but kind of knowing and finally finding out that I'm deaf, like to those that don't know, like I have high frequency hearing loss, so that means like I can't hear some levels of like high noises. So when people are spreading, that means like high tones and high voices. It's a little bit more difficult for me to hear. It's kind of like jumbled. So having the doc and also debate helps because I'm only listening to one thing. So that's why I was able to like go and do debate because of that type of hearing. But what made it really difficult is when people were kind of slurring their words, and also when there wasn't anything to follow, and also all the written analysis, they just refused to send, even if it was already typed out. So I feel like that is just another form of inaccessibility. Of course, like other teams will find that, you know, they have justification for not sending those things out. But at least from my perspective and being like a deaf person, like I kind of just want to read that. And also in debate, when you're listening and flowing, like even as a judge, right? when there's a lot of noises in the room, that's why I appreciate y'all when you're muting your mics. It helps me because I'm only like, listening to one thing. When there's a lot of like noises, if you are like a hearing person and it's loud and you can't hear, imagine like how deaf people like feel and kind of those things. So even if you're like into ableism and you're reading these type of arguments, don't just read it for an argument, actually like live it and consider that people are experiencing this. So, you know, also just consider those things. Don't just think about what we're saying as, you know, these are winning arguments that you should be telling people, but also consider that people need accommodations and also different forms of accessibility, right? You don't need to be mean in order to just like get a ballot. Like, I'm sure if you have like a one-page analysis, like that's not going to be winning an argument if you just send it to the other team. Yeah, I think this whole thing became about like spreading or starting the conversation, but do y'all have anything else that you'd like us to kind of go over? Because I wanted to kind of take this opportunity because like we have all the labs combined, and I think that multiple heads are better than like one or two. So especially like folks from our lab, please feel free to like get different perspectives because they're super helpful.
Someone asked a question. Wait, so people don't get mad at you if you don't tell them to spread? What do y'all think about that? Personally, I'll say that they do. They get real mad. Jasmine's one of them people that got mad. Yeah. But like people, if someone tells you, so think about it like this. There's two ways to consider why someone might get mad. The first way is that like you're asking them to do something differently from how they've practiced, and they may not have practiced in the ways that you need. And that's just considering equity. Like just for them to make the space something one that's accommodating for you, they would have to thought to prepare to accommodate that, right? And that's not something that we typically do in debate, is consider our opponents in that capacity, because like we are not trying to communicate to them. Often we're trying to communicate to the judge. So the criticism of spreading is suggesting that for us to even be able to communicate to the judge, you have to be able to communicate clearly to me and whoever else is being prevented from being in this discussion. And so they may not think about needing to do that when doing your preparation. Especially if you've considered, like the person who asked that question, that spreading is everybody's forte. You thought you were following the rules, learning how to spread and everything else. This is what we do here in debate. To do this thing, you have to do it the way that everybody else does. So not spreading is a challenge to how some people learn debate. And then the other aspect of why somebody might get mad when you ask them not to spread is like, if they just don't care, you know, not even the fact that you might not be able to participate in the debate until they have to accommodate that and they weren't prepared, and that is alarming to them, but that's annoying to them too, that they have to like then think about this other factor that wasn't relevant originally in the debate, that they have to consider you. They may just literally be pretty upset about that. But that's not a reason not to make the argument. For people who are scared of making people upset with you, for making that, you have to consider, will you be able to participate in the debate? If you aren't getting anything out of it because you can't participate in the best way possible, then they can be mad all they want to, Grumpy. Like, but you can still make the argument, and it's important for you to recognize that, like, even when they're angry, you should stick by what is truth. If that's not something that you really need to be able to participate in the debate, you shouldn't make the argument. But if it is something you need to participate in the argument, then them being upset should not deter you. The spinach muffin cake, y'all irritating.
I saw that and was just like,
I think how we were kind of freestyling things for a little bit.
Oh, we had one question that I think relates to one of the discussion questions that I was going to bring up actually, which was this the one about like, if you can't find evidence for a K, can you just like write out the bulk of it? And
yeah, that was a question.
Leia answered that with like, yeah, a lot of the impacts can be written analysis. I think also we can go beyond that and ask, like, do you need to have evidence for a K, and what constitutes as evidence?
So I'll answer from I don't think so. I don't think that you need evidence for everything that you say if you are reading a critical argument. And I'm saying that from the perspective of someone, okay, Devin, we can do the next thing. I can do it too. I'm saying that from the perspective of someone who read the same ad for 3 years in a row and then lost on it a lot her senior year because of a different partner. But it was 9 minutes of poetry, just like straight up poetry, like here's an argument. And part of it was because prior to reading that chant for Sheknek, yeah. But part of that was because prior to doing the poetry aspect of it, it's because we knew the author of the poetry. And we read articles and read books, and we also read some of that stuff on the negative, or there was an affirmative before the poetry. And so people kind of already knew what our flavor was and what we did and what we said. But we became our own evidence in some part of a way. So like, I guess first is yes, you can. 2 is like the different types of what qualifies as evidence. I would argue that like different things such as poetry, if you're someone who's using like animation and video, if you're someone who's using more kind of not blog post style stuff, but like that can be part of your kind of larger commentary or point, that those are all things that help you make your argument. I've seen a lot of interesting rounds where people have cards on cards on cards on cards on cards, but don't know how to put together an argument or how to use their own evidence, because you become the person, right, who's making a claim about the world that you then warrant out however it is that you choose to warrant it out. And I've seen people who have the quote unquote best evidence not know how to do that, because they're just like, read the evidence. Hey, judge, promise you, cards are real good, judge. And I'm over here like, if you can't tell me which card and tell me why, I'm not going to read it. And so with that answer and my background, I think that it's definitely the case where if you are putting together a critique or a critical affirmative, and you know what it is that you're trying to say, and you've been informed by examples, like, it doesn't matter what kind of app that I read. I'm always going to read about today at 2:42 p.m. The screen is reloading. I have text to talk stuff going on, y'all, and it literally is the worst thing in America. Stop. You can hear it. Okay, thank you. I don't know what I did, but it happened. So it does not matter necessarily the type of app or the amount of evidence that you put into it. What matters is the work that you're doing prior to the app's construction. Are you reading up about what it is that you're trying to say? Do you have examples, socially, historically, about the point that you are trying to get across? Because those things are going to matter, but then also have that moment where you understand that you don't have normative or what other folks are going to call as like empirical evidence. Have that argument ready. Have what you do have, because you may not have, the PhD backing behind what you're saying, but what do you have, and why is that important for what it is that you are trying to say? And start thinking through those responses, because that's going to be your best defense or justification for why it is that you're interacting at that kind of medium for evidence. And I'm sure Devin, with his head nod, has some things to kind of add to that or disagree, which is like, no, you don't disagree? Okay. Okay. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the evidence thing. Write what you want. Make it good. Be crafty. And if you want to talk to me about that kind of stuff, talk to Brooke about that kind of stuff, because I'm gonna really put together arguments that beat teams like Harvard with no cards. No cards. Zero Zippo, but had a lot to say and used a lot of their evidence. That's the best part of the debate. When you can use their evidence, what they're presenting, as your counter reading of it, and being like, you have said this about the world, but how are you talking to me in this debate? How are you engaging in this activity? Well, became my evidence. That sucks to suck, doesn't it? But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Jasmine was saying, this was what I was kind of going over with at least our lab yesterday about alternative forms of evidence, like using videos from like activists on the ground and other just like posts that are written by people that are just not in academic published articles, right? You could like reading assignments, like what Jasmine said, like when you read and you research like the topic and you kind of really generally know like what forensic science is, what sentencing is like, a lot of this analysis can be applied in the debate argument, in the debates that you're having, right? So when you don't have any cards, but you're well read and you know the literature, you're able to come up with impact arguments and analysis off the top of your head because you understand the content instead of relying on the cards. Because when you do, like what Jasmine said, like when you do read your opponent's card, you're able to spot faults in it because when you're reading, just generally, not cutting for a card, but just reading for knowledge, you already know the analysis and like why that card is wrong, right? You don't need to find a specific card like, hey, coach, I need to cut a specific card for this argument. No, because when you're reading about like why there's still bias in forensic science, right? You can apply the analysis to that card, right? But you're more well-read and you can make it very specific and it's basically a card takeout because you're already well-read in that area. So that's, I think, what we're just kind of like trying to emphasize, that not everything has to be carded and have directed, refuted evidence, especially when you're already doing that type of like topic reading. That's going to be super useful in round, like when you don't even need cards because everything that you're arguing and saying is already justified and it already makes sense because you're reading a multitude of authors. So yeah, that's what I want to get out there. Not everything has to be carded. Not everything has to have evidence. And the best thing that you could do in debate is like read on your own, read what interests you, because a lot of that is like what comes out in your rebuttals.
The only thing that you need to make an argument is a claim and a warrant. To clarify, the warrant does not have to be peer reviewed. Oftentimes the cards that we use are not that. So if you thought that evidence had to be this holy super fancy thing that you have no access to, that's not necessarily correct. You need a claim and you need a warrant. I like to think that or explain that when you come into a debate round, or if you came into a classroom, you don't come in with nothing. You know, you are not a person that is empty of things and thoughts. Like, you have something to contribute to that conversation. The only thing that you have to do is make the warrant aspect to the judge, right? Like, make that warrant clear. Because your warrant is still based on your interpretation of reality, but you'd probably do a better job explaining your interpretation of reality than Volp. Remember that author that we were just looking at? You probably know more about what you think about this thing than someone else, and trying to, make explanations based off of what they said. And, because you can still be informed by what other people think. The great thing about doing untraditional styles of debate and using untraditional methods for research is that it doesn't have to be just your own thoughts. You can be informed by other people. Because that's pretty much how I think that the folks at like Saya and Julia, or me and my debate partner Coco, or others teams that have seen relatively high amount of success in reading arguments untraditionally in debate, is that they're still in conversation. So for us who are in English classes, like books that are in conversation with each other, we're still in conversation with other thinkers that are informing our opinion and our interpretation of reality. So remember, you can be your own thinker in debate. That's what we want you to be, and that other people should help you inform your opinion, but ultimately your opinion should be your own.
Don't forget to read books.
I got a question that just came in that says, in the situation that you do get opponents that want cards as warrants, how can you respond if you only have your thoughts? I think that's a great question. And I'll open that up.
So for me, the thing is that you have to remember is that your own thoughts have to still be structured by what you see as your theory of power and how you understand how power operates. Because there's like, even Brooke had a freaking theory of power, and the stuff that she was saying is very subtle and not really disclosed to people so they could locate her, but it is still something. No, it's good. I'm saying, like, you was like fluid and stuff, right? But the thing is that you have to internally know what that is to be able to explain it to judges, right? It's that it's not like these thoughts are coming from nowhere. These folks are well read about stuff. I think Jasmine is. I don't know. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so I'm just kidding. But yes, people are well read about the arguments that they're making, and don't be fooled, right? Is that a lot of people make this look easy because you're watching it on a video screen, like when you see them debate and stuff, but it's not. There's a lot of work behind it and a lot of reading, oftentimes more than what these people that are like very highly traditional teams, because sometimes their coaches are cutting this shit for them. But the thing is that like engaging in this style of debate, you have to read until your eyes bleed. Oh my God, I didn't mean to make that rhyme. But anyway, you like, that's the only way that you can come to understanding of how you're going to personally argue. Now, when it comes to answering the stuff that people say, like, oh, you need a card for that, it's just like, for me, in my perspective, if me and my debate partner were to run arguments, and a lot of our stuff was do like Black stuff generally, we would have been like, that's you're wanting to call for a card is a very Eurocentric understanding of how we produce knowledge production and evidence, because in Afrocentric understandings, self-knowledge is tantamount to all knowledge. So you calling for a card is something that is acultural, apolitical, and doesn't really relate to the material experience that we engage with when it comes to the world. So you might think that your Eurocentric knowledge construction is the best, but that is a problem, is that when you try to locate your Eurocentric knowledge as the core of all knowledge, that subjugates alternative forms of knowledge like ours that doesn't give it relevance or credence in certain spaces, right? And so that's why I think that you have to have a theory of power that is able to explain why their claims of saying like you need to have a card for this is like irrelevant and oftentimes even harmful to the way that you want to understand the world, because a lot of like African traditions are based on oral traditions and they don't freaking use cards, right? So why do I need to use a card if my culture and the way that I understand the world is based on oral traditions where we pass down intergenerational knowledge through spoken word? So it's just like, you calling for a card is very like ethnocentric, number one, and probably anti-Black. So not probably, it is. But the thing is that you have to be able to analyze it through your understanding of theory of power. That's literally what you have to do. Or at least if you're not going to disclose it to people, internally know what it is so you can explain the disadvantages of why them asking that question is very flawed and rooted in a particular form of knowledge production that is very hegemonic and violent for your being or existence. So
I also just like to explain why they're wrong. Like in general, like why there's not a warrant to why you need the card part. Because the context, if we accept the idea that most things, I mean, like I think there are very few things that cannot be contested and are truly capital T truths. And so knowing that when people present cards and things that are based in someone's perspective of the truth, we can't even talk to that person. We can't even determine if that was the original intent or message behind that. Even things like statistics that are within the cards, which is what they'll usually use to show why their things are way better than whatever it is that you could say. Because we talked about this data, like Devin said this earlier, how people talk about Black people being represented as criminals more. If you have some statistics about why that, about like some Black people that got arrested, like Black people, and they highlight Black people have gotten arrested or are committing 87% of crimes. Now, okay, what's the context for the statistic that was, that it was gotten may not even be present in that article. The author may just be making this claim, but where's the citation here? And even then, what specific area are they talking about, and is that relevant to the reach of the entire statement that they're making? Because they may be talking about, in I don't know, Beverly Hills, California, or in one small specific place, but they're making it seem as if it's about all the things. And so your card that you're using is probably less specific, or it could be less specific or less helpful in the debate round than what we can contribute from our own perspectives in combination with other people's thoughts.
I'll
Yeah,
just add oh.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Just adding on to that, I guess. Like Devin said, you definitely have to have your own theory of power, and it definitely doesn't have to be something that's super obvious or even that's explicitly explained. Like a lot of times when I explain what my debate partner and I's negative strat was for like the second half of our senior year, I make it sound like, oh, we just like explained what was wrong about other people's apps, which is like the gist of what we did, but the critique that we would make was heavily centered on the fact that most of the people we would be debating were like white kids from like rich private schools, and we were debating on the education topic where most of them were running apps about public education, and we were like, we'll know more about public education just from having been in the public school system than y'all will know about public education from reading like a bunch of articles, because all of those things are like distanced from the way that happens. And so that was our justification for why we could just use like logic and common sense as like, this is why things are going to pan out badly. And of course we'd always have like things that we had read, research that we had done to back that stuff up that made us really knowledgeable about like the way these things had played out in the past, the way that these things work right now. But also we didn't have to like card any of that because it was also backed up by just like our everyday experiences, like going to high school and like what we saw and like what we had experienced. So yeah, a lot of that stuff is like finding a way for it to fit into sort of like what you think about how knowledge should be legitimized or like processed, or like what forms of knowledge should be acceptable, and fitting that into a theory of power definitely affects like what you can say in a debate round and like how you can defend against having to do things that are norms in debate.
Just wanted to add to that before Kurt does this question, because I can't answer that, but I know 3 people that can. But I just kind of want to add, if y'all look at that link, just to add on to what like Brooke and what everybody else was saying about warrants and the intent of the author. I like this quote because like once I read it, I hear this a lot in debates, and especially practice debate rounds when students are like, Wilderson said this. They may have read the book, they may have read cut cards, you know, that they haven't actually read the books that Wilderson has written, right? But they will say things like, Wilderson are used this way, but everything is paraphrased and everything is like subjective up to your interpretation, right? You take the words that these authors use, but you don't understand their intent, right? Until you have context via their interviews. A lot of people do this same thing with Angela Davis as well. A lot of her quotes are taken out of context, right? It's skewed into something else, but without that context of like that author's intent or that writer's intent, a lot of things can be skewed in debate, right? So always keep that in mind when you're hearing the type of rhetoric or type of argument that debaters are presenting, right? Is it really the content of what the author is saying, or is it their own spin on that form of argument, right? So for example, like this quote, it says, like feminism, post-colonialism, and Marxism, Afro-pessimism is a lens of interpretation in which explains the structure of suffering, right? Wilderson saying like, okay, it's a way that we can explain suffering, right? But I hear a lot in debate round that like, Wilderson says that we should end this. And they will just like quote things that are in the book, but are not the intent of how it was originally written, right? And I feel like that's a misrepresentation of the author and how things are written generally. So also just be aware of that, of how like, how debaters can kind of misunderstand or also just misinterpret the actual intention. And it's good to just kind of be aware of that when you're listening to these type of arguments, right? That the debaters are not just like putting words into the author's mouth, or at least skewing that into their own arguments. Do y'all want to answer that champ question? Because they want to know.
What was it? Oh, wow. Jesus Christ. Um, you gotta win a national championship like over 10 years ago, maybe? Or have a national championship for 10 years? I guess that makes you an OG or something. Or like, yeah, read. That's number one. Like, and what I will say, becoming a champion is not easy. You're gonna lose a lot, really. You are. And that's how it works. Unless you just come in and you're just like naturally talented and you have all these skills. Like I'm just gonna keep it real. Like in high school, I never went to a TOC. I didn't know what the TOC was. I debated in the Baltimore Urban Debate League, and I didn't learn what the TOC was until I was in college. I didn't know what it was until then. Um, but OG is just like original gangster. Oh my God, no. But so I would say like I started where y'all were at, to be honest. And I was at my UDL camp, and I went every year of high school, and I always knew that like I love debate. And then when I got to my senior year, I was like, oh, I want to debate in college. It's gonna be cool. At first, I was going to go to Georgia State, but that changed, and I went to University of Louisville, and then I transferred to Towson University. So, you know, sometimes your first pick of your school doesn't always work out, or that you go to is not always going to happen. But I would say debating in college is really good, and debating in college, particularly for y'all's population, is very necessary because it doesn't look like your UDL in college debate at all. And that's something that surprised me when I got there. And I was like, oh, shoot. And like I was debating during like 2005 to 2009 period. So during that time, me and my debate partner were probably maybe one team out of a sea of 80 that was both Black. And even then, there was barely any other Black people yet, unless there was like Louisville at the tournament, or Amber from Dartmouth, if she was at the tournament. That was pretty much it. Three Black people out of like 100 plus folks. So that was the thing. But it doesn't look like that. It doesn't look like that now. There's been some progress, but we shouldn't focus on the progress. We need to constantly talk about why it needs to have more folks that look like y'all.
But I know we're kind of toward the end of that, but really important what Devin was saying. Like a lot of people had to take L's in order for debate to look like what it does today, right? Because these arguments weren't really bought before. So it's really important to kind of like pay homage to that and just like learn that history.
Yeah, I thought this was a great discussion. I hope that this was as helpful for you all as it was for me to think through. Your questions are important. I hope you guys don't ever feel bad about the questions that you ask, and I always hope that we get more. Sometimes we get the same folks who ask questions, and that's great. You should always get the questions that you need answered, and they often help answer someone else's questions. But just know that when you ask, questions, and if you want some that you haven't thought about, always find a person. If you don't feel comfortable putting out directly to the group, you can always like message a couple of us, because remember we got the rule of 3 that's still relevant, but you can always reach out to us and get whatever help you need. We're genuinely here to help you, and it's great to just use your resources while you can, because I know that it's hard throughout the year to get some of these things answered. And if you had them this year, if you had them last year, definitely use this time to your advantage as much as possible.
I wanted to put my last little words to just like goodbye.
That's your word?
Y'all have been, y'all are cool. Like I enjoy working with students like y'all. Are refreshing. You ask questions, you engage. It's so cool to like discuss, debate, and then debate things. I don't know if that makes sense, but like it's cool to actually have to think about debate more. I feel like I think more about like debate, why I'm still in this activity, how I can become a better educator because of like opportunities like this and working with UDLs. And taking y'all to wherever you want to go in debate. If that's becoming more vocal in your communities and how to become an advocate, boom, got you. We can give some skills and also things that we do in our everyday life. If it's to become a national champion and maybe an OG national champion, because, you know, we all will just have to live with that just timeline guilt of when we were born. And also what we have had the moxie to do it. Who knows? The OG can tell us. But if the goal is to become like a champion, we can do that too, and really build that debate with you. But it's just so cool, the spectrum and the diversity of potential that is here. And I get to just say that I'm a small little iota to what all y'all's really great stories are going to be and how debate maybe played something in that. So yeah, that's my bye. My bye is I'll see you tomorrow. Keep that good energy. Yay debate. You're amazing.
My advice is to watch these videos, okay? Like, watch these videos. I spent the hour and some change.
Facts.
So, watch the video.
Bye, y'all. It was a really great meeting. Have a
So
good
I'm,
rest of your day.
so I'm confused. Are we not going to lab? Or is the campus
Yeah,
It's
open?
over.
Oh.
Oh,
No.
my mind is over.
Oh.
So a little bit more time, but like we can probably regroup as Varsity. Lab says at 3.
Okay.
My counter plan PowerPoint is going to be a little bit shorter tomorrow, so we'll have more lab time in the morning. I'm trying to keep it under 30 minutes because like the attention and stuff. But yeah.
Cool. I'm cool. I'm cool with having. I just didn't know. I thought the camp was over at 4. But I guess not. All right.
We do like also. Okay, I think I'm gonna end this meeting. So
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.